Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to meet you, talk to you. Maybe I'll say quickly a few things about me. I'm the president of Radio Amateurs of Canada in my 6th year. Actually, Rick Roderick and I have sort of are exactly the same pattern. I'd met him in July when I was vice president in 2015, and he was first vice president of ARRL, because the RAC president gets invited to all of the ARRL board meetings as an observer, along with a representative of the International Amateur Radio Union. And as you'll see later on in my presentation, when I talk about the close links between Radio Amateurs of Canada and the ARRL, it'll be pretty clear why that happens. I'm now retired. What I had studied was physics. I did graduate work in radio astronomy, and then and some research there. And then I worked in the federal government, mostly on technology policy, and then ultimately science and technology, primarily with the space industry. And I'm now retired. Along the way, actually, I did one assignment into the equivalent of State Department, our foreign ministry, where I worked on international cooperation in space and communications for a while, around the beginning of the International Space Station. So that was a lot of fun. So I'll get into this. We are a national amateur radio organization, and the objectives and purposes, the functioning of these organizations are all very similar. We'll go through this. I'm not going to read it all. I'll put it up for you. But if you looked at the these are the objectives out of our Constitution.
Glenn,
yes?
Your presentation is not showing up. Your share.
It's not?
No.
I didn't know it was supposed to be now. I thought you were just introducing yourself.
Oh, okay. No, I was trying to start. Sorry about that. So what's
the green button in the center, down the center bottom of your Zoom thing? It's a green. It says share screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right. In fact, what I did was I forgot to hit share screen, and I started the I started the presentation before I hit share screen. Sorry about that.
Chicken Lash's wet noodle. We'll have to have you come back.
Okay.
We'll torture you.
Now I'll share it.
Now it's
okay.
coming up. Okay, there you are.
Okay, so anyway, all right, that's fine. He didn't need to see much of a slide for that. So this is the type. That's the introduction. This is the my first screen, and let's see. No, okay, I'm sharing the screen. I'm in. Okay, yeah, here we are. So mouse does it. So I'm just going to click through this, our Constitution. I'm not going to go through all of it. Generally, national organizations represent their members in dealing with the issues that affect amateur radio in their country. And so all of those things are similar. There are, of course, differences of scale, and I'm going to talk about that. And there are differences in each kind of country. And those really influence a lot what you do and how you do it. And in this presentation, particularly for an American audience, I wanted to say some things about the kind of country Canada is and how that influences some of what we do. This map is a way of showing the concentration of the Canadian population. And each colored section represents 1/4 of the Canadian population. That tiny little red section in the bottom, which is between Detroit and Buffalo, has the same population as all of the yellow part. I live in, and as you can see, the Canadian population is concentrated right above the US border. We're the second largest country in the world. Only Russia is larger, but there are 36 countries with more people than us. And the Canadian population is about the same as California. So think of us, it would be as if you took the population of California and spread it across an area larger than the United States. You'd have something like Canada. This is another illustration of that. The red line on this chart shows 100 kilometers, 62 miles from the US border. Probably between 3/4 and 90% of Canadians live within an hour's drive of the US. And that's had an impact that actually on some of our economy when cable, in some other things that affected both of our countries. When cable TV was starting decades ago, in the US, it was mostly for people in rural and suburban areas who didn't get good off-air broadcasts. In Canada, it was in the big cities who were a little too far away to get all the US stations off the air. And we have lots of US stations on all of our television now. So Canadians pay a lot of attention to what's happening in the US. Other aspects of our environment that influence us. Canada's a federation like the states. We have provinces rather than states, and we have a division of power between the federal government and our provincial governments. We are a parliamentary democracy with, in that way, similar to Britain and Australia, with a elected parliament. The leadership of the government comes out of those who are elected in those elections. We have an apolitical public service, and this actually influences some of how we deal with regulations. When a new government is formed, even if it's the opposition party, by and large, the entire public service stays the same. We don't have the wholesale changeover of senior people that happens in the States, which in some ways makes it a little easier for us dealing with ongoing issues. We have an education, an economic activity that's similar to the US and Western Europe. And we started as the US did as a series of British colonies. We had a more gradual emergence from that British colonial system. In 1867, 4 of what were, I guess, would be colonies at that time, were formed into a dominion. In fact, it happened that it was an act passed in the British Parliament that created Canada out of Ontario, Quebec, and 2 of the Atlantic provinces, and made it self-governing for all things except for international relations. And over a period of time, even that gradually evolved. Our constitution as such was the British North America Act, an act passed by the Parliament there. Canada started, because we have a lot of dealings with the States, we actually in the 1920s had created treaties with the US without getting British approval as we were gradually moving away from that. It was only in 1931 where we had full legislative independence, and all of Canada is entirely responsible for its governance, with the exception that there were some formal things that had to go to the British Parliament. They always routinely approved it, but it was only in 1982 that our constitution became entirely Canadian. So that, it's got a marked difference in terms of how we've evolved and dealt with that. And in practice for amateur radio, one of the significant things, and it's more a decision of recent governments than, it's partly the division of powers between provinces and the federal government, but provinces are largely responsible for things that happen within their borders. The federal government, like in the States, deals with things that go across borders and between them. So consequently, emergencies are largely provincial responsibility. And in fact, about 8 or 10 years ago, the federal government, which had been operating a training center and letting all the operations happen within our provinces, even closed that. So we don't have anything like FEMA. And it means that the way we do emergency communications is considerably different from the way you would. And the last thing, which I'm kind of, it's my bias, I guess, we have a lot less lawyers in the system. And when we talk to our regulator, we're talking to technical people. We don't need lawyers writing legal documents, handing them to lawyers in the regulator. We've had a tradition, I guess, until fairly recently, the actual enforcement people of all of our regional offices all had to be hams because they were giving the amateur radio exams. And that has changed in the last decade or two, but it's still now the case. It's the director of the region who decides whether he wants everyone to be a ham or not. And so we have a lot of, as happens in some of the SCC, but we have a lot of people who are radio amateurs who are in the regulator. Not as many as I'd like, but so now that's the background. A little bit about amateur radio within Canada, and again some of the differences here. About 20 years ago, and I think regulators all around the world don't like the idea that they have to do administrative stuff to keep renewing licenses. In Canada, the decision was made was you pass the exam once, you're a ham forever. No cost for the exam. If the person giving the exam these days, 95 or more % of them are by volunteers, probably like in the States. For us, the problem is they don't want to take a call sign off the list until they know for sure the person's dead. And so we probably have in our list of hams more silent keys than I'd like. And we've got even one of our volunteers who comes in and takes information from clubs and digs out obituaries from newspapers to prove that that call sign can be released. We have 3 levels, I guess similar to yours. Our basic level, though, I think is probably a little more complex. It's more like your general exam. This was instituted when we stopped the requirement for CW. Originally, there were just three exams, basic and advanced, which is like your highest level. The advanced one is where you can build all sorts of equipment. So the same kinds of requirements and authorization. We got the middle, then the difference, the basic with honors allows you to work phone and HF. And in the days of CW, you would have to get basic, and then you'd get CW, and you could work HF. Now you could get it with SCORE. And you can't tell the level of authorization from our call signs like you can in the States. All the call signs look alike. They mostly have 3-letter suffixes, and I'll show you the other call signs first. The call sign prefix, and I think this was a US thing originally, was determined by where you lived, but it's still the case in Canada. If you move, you have to change your call sign, but you do it for free. Give up your old call sign, you get a new one. On the other hand, if you have someone who will take your mail, you can get a call sign from that area. So it's not that unusual for someone, if they're operating remotely and they've got a friend or a cottage or a place you can get the mail, to have we've got additional call signs. We still give the CW exam, but these days very, very few people take it. But if you do take it, you get the same privileges as the basic with honors. And I guess another major difference is, and we have much less regulation than you do. It's partly the approach of the Canadian government, I think, to regulations compared to the US government. In Canada, there's much more emphasis on regulating for results rather than regulating for how you do things. So, but for us, for amateur radio, the band plan is created by by Radio Amateurs of Canada. And it's not a legal document. It's something to guide amateurs, and they follow it. I think the States is a bit actually, there aren't too many countries in the world who have the regulations you do. We have a lot, you know, we are authorized to use all of the modes on all of the bands, and it's up to us how we use it. And the other, which is a bit of a problem, we have a lot less, I guess, are penalties for people who do bad things. You know, they took away even the use of bad language a while ago, and they don't, definitely doing things like deliberately interfering, that would be an offense. And the things that remain offenses for us are the kinds of things that would probably bother commercial radio activities as well. So in other things like hams behaving badly, they hope that amateur radio can be largely self-regulating, which puts a little more pressure on us to figure how you do that. We've been growing, amateur radio has been growing in Canada. To us for 2% a year. Canadian population's growing less than 1% a year. Half that, by the way, is immigration, because no one's having as many kids anymore. So the number of hams is consistently growing at 2% a year when the population is growing at less than 1. Some of that might be the age distribution. We have a lot older, as not a lot of young people now. I'm not sure exactly all of it, but and we get new hams from some of our immigrants too, right? So last August, for the numbers we have, we had 72,000 hams compared to, right about now it's 777,000 in the States. So we have maybe about a tenth the number of hams you do. We have about a ninth the population you do, so it's pretty close ratios. And one thing I know we can get that the ARRL doesn't seem to be able to get is, so what's the distribution of ages amongst the amateur population? And I've been getting this information again since 2013, because they need to have the person's birth date to prove who they are. It's easy for them to pull out this information for us. About the only thing that you really see in here, and in 2013 they only gave me 80 plus. Later on, I'm getting them for all of the ages, and there's not really too much change here. I think what the one change that you're seeing in that little bit of shift to gray is the latest one, 2019, and I'll get to 2021 sooner. Is the baby boom. We had a baby boom like you did, and our baby boom started in '46. So there's a large chunk of people who were born between 46 and 56 in our population. And so there are a lot of hams in that group. We don't get a lot of people under 20. There are a lot of, anecdotally talking to clubs, there'll be a bunch of people in their 30s, and because they've got money and a job, I think. And then there are a lot of people who've been interested for a long time, and their kids are growing up, and they have time to do it. A little bit of history of RAC. This is linked to the ARRL. Our first national organization was the Canadian division of the ARRL in 1920. Later than the ARRL itself, in 1914, although the circumstances were different. In 1914, there was no amateur radio in Canada because Canada declared war on Germany at the same time as Britain in 1914, and amateur radio stopped from 1914 to 1918. So we started as the Canadian division. This is where some other social factors come into this. 1967 was the 100th anniversary of Canada. Very big year, big event in Canada, lots of national pride. To have the Canadian division of the ARRL as Canada's national organization was not that different in the early days, because we're so close and interact so much with the States. All sorts of professional associations and unions and whatever were North American. We had auto workers in Canada, and steel workers, and professional associations, and the rest of it. After 1967, people wanted to have a little bit more control. And so the United Auto Workers in Canada over a period of time became the Canadian Auto Workers, as one example. And as well as the Canadian division of the ARRL being the national organization, there were provincial organizations beforehand, and there are, just as there are clubs. And in 1967, in the year of the centennial, the provincial organizations decided to federate, to make another national organization. It didn't last long as a federation of provincial organizations, and it became a member-based organization. It published its own magazine, and it was doing some things, I think, that the Canadian division of the ARRL weren't doing, like organizing meetings with radio amateurs and our regulator in regions across the country. And the Canadian division of the ARRL, I guess, responded to some of those, because in effect they had two national organizations. So in '79, they incorporated as a self-governing and self-administered administered division, incorporated in Canada, but they were still a division of the ARRL. And in 1988, so it took quite a while for the changes to happen, that so they changed the name, but they stayed as a division of the ARRL in '79. In '88, they became an autonomous national organization. So they were no longer a part of the ARRL, but closely aligned, and they published a magazine, QST Canada, using some QST material and some Canadian contact, and they had the same field organization as the ARRL. That led to ultimately, the country's not that large. I think that they could survive in the '70s, because we all know there's a huge boom in amateurs in the '70s, right? That was one of the highest growth periods. The clubs that I know that have 100 members here had 300 back at that time. But eventually, the pressure of trying to have two complete organizations with a small population, they both had financial difficulties. And after 4 years of negotiations, and Larry Price, who was president of the ARRL, played a big role in helping facilitate that. The two of them merged to form our present organization. Just as an aside, I'm going to mention later one of our things that we do. We have a Hall of Fame for amateur radio for Canadians. So we've got one associate, and it's Larry Price, because of the role that he played in forming what we have now. So what do? We do what everyone does in terms of representing radio amateurs to our regulator. We do it maybe in some different ways. Partly, I think, because of the history of what the CARF had done. We have a system of formal meetings with our regulator. Once a year, we set an agenda co-chaired by the president of RAC and the senior official of the regulator, where we exchange information on where we are, who's doing what are the issues we're doing, and we set schedules to work through projects. We still have the problem that everyone has everywhere in the world, that our regulators also regulate all of the commercial interests. There's a lot more money in the commercial interests, and politicians are a lot more interested in them, and we have to fight for attention. But we have regular meetings. We have another unique institution in Canada called the Radio Advisory Board of Canada. And this was formed back in 1944. The Second World War transformed Canada from a largely rural agrarian society into a place where people built not only cars, but planes and aircraft and tanks and radios. And so it changed the nature of the country, and the government of the day, knowing in '44 that the war was on its way to being run, and preparing for the time after the war, one that recognized the importance of communication and wanted to have advice from people who are involved in communications as they set Canadian regulations and rules. 7 groups were invited to found that, the National Telephone Company, some broadcasters, probably Telegraph at that time even, and the radio amateurs, which would have been the Canadian division of the ARRL. And that organization has consisted to this day. Its role is to review all proposed regulations and give technical advice to government. We are on it. I'm our member, and I'm a member of its executive. So we not only have and we run the consultations on topics, and we also, as a result, have a lot of fairly informal access to be able to talk to people. We of course we send one of our representatives to the World Radio Conference meetings, and this was something again decided before RAC came into existence. It's funded by donations from our members. We're a small group. We have only 2 professional staff, 2 staff. One person who does the bookkeeping and administration, and one who does all of our communications on the website, the magazine, and social media. Everything else is done by volunteers. And I know that volunteers are important in all organizations, but I have to say when I visit Newington, I look with envy at the offices. And we of course have the Canadian, who is right now the president of the IARU. We have some formal recognition things that we do. We have a Canadian Amateur of the Year that our members nominate, and it's decided by a vote of the directors. There's not necessarily one every year, but if people who have made major contributions are recognized. And we have, and this has been around for quite a long time, a Hall of Fame. And this, we create an independent board of trustees, one from each of our province, that reviews the nominations and decides whether someone meets the criteria, and names people to this to recognize those who've made a big contribution to amateur radio. So we have a field service, much similar to what you have. Things aren't the greatest right now. We're doing some things to strengthen it. We kind of see both emergency communications and community service as two different aspects of it. What happens in emergency communications, the situation is each of the provinces are very different in terms of what kinds of emergencies can happen. You know, one of our provinces, Manitoba, which has the Red River running through it, every second or third year they have a major flood, and the hams go out and man all the dikes and let people know if everything's safe. You know, that's very regular. In some of the other places where there are lots of people and lots of money, there are really extensive communication systems, and it's much less likely that things are going to break down. So we have in the ARES groups, we've had a debate about 8 years ago, and recognized that the different circumstances mean that we shouldn't be defining a structure for people. We should be telling them to pick the structure that works for the people, for the agency that you're serving. And if it's an ARES group who would like to do something and doesn't have an agency to serve and not sure who they're serving, then that's a bit of an issue too. And like you, there's a huge amount of community service that's done, often by clubs, sometimes by ARES groups, and all sorts of providing communications for community activities. And so our role nationally is training and support, and we're involved in some reinvigoration right now of that, thinking about training and again, against a all of those things. A recent development is that there's a consortium formed from all of the not-for-profit organizations that help out in emergencies. There's some similar things, I think, happening in the States, but I think that FEMA might have a role in it. This is entirely run by the not-for-profit organizations. Radio Amateurs of Canada is one, the Red Cross, those kinds of people. We do a lot of things related to youth. We have a youth education program funded by donations from our clubs and members. We don't have enough operating money to do it, and provide grants to youth organizations, you know, or to help young people be exposed and take advantage of amateur radio. Everything from an elementary school that wants to set up a radio station to a bunch of cadets that want to set up their program, wants to have amateur radio. And we give money, a small amount of money to them, but as long as we're not the only one providing money. We have a scholarship program to young radio amateurs in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics programs in all of our colleges and universities. We have, in the last 3 years, been doing a lot of work on CubeSats. Our regulators and our regulations don't really understand amateur satellites, and we have students putting together satellites, and we want to make sure that and I know what's happening in the States too, where a lot of the university satellites are given given experimental licenses and operate in amateur bands, and it's a problem. We want these to be, learning opportunities run by students if they're going to use amateur frequencies. So we're continuing to work on that. Actually going to meet again with our regulator in the next little while on that. They don't even have a reference to the amateur radio service in the current regulations. And we've been doing things in the last 3 years at our Canada-wide science fair, which has sort of the ultimate result of local and regional science fairs that happens in different regions each day. And it's not just the students who are interested in science and technology that are our audience, but schools bring kids and parents bring kids to those events. And so we've been joining in with other, there's an expo where science-based companies and some government departments that use science a lot have a booth, and we have them as well. Usually done by the local club, and we provide the support, documentation, images, things like that, and they man the booths. When you have thousands of students and teachers, I think it's a good target for us. And as an aside, from working with young people, there's I know a number of people who've done it with schools. Young kids, especially like the preteens, love CW. They're keen on code. You probably heard this. They're keen on codes of any kind, and the idea of being able to make their name with dots and dashes, or dits and das, I should say, really turns them on. The last one, someone was telling me one of these students came by and he tried it, and he went running over to grab all of his friends to bring them over for them to do it. So it's something we can do. Okay. A lot of you, for when you're on the air, I'm not sure, we usually put this up at our booth at Dayton, and a lot of people stop by to take a look at it. So this shows the Canadian call sign prefixes. They were all VEs, and then when you run out of, you don't have enough call signs, they're VAs. When we ran out of those, we used VYs, as you can see. The two on the east side, the VO was used in Newfoundland. It's the last province to join Canada in 1949. So, and the VO2 is in Labrador. Not very many people in the north. Everyone wants to get a VY0, but there are probably less than 10 hams. There's a station right up here in Alert, which is an environmental experimental station. 3 of the people who go there regularly to maintain equipment and do experiments are hams, and they've set up an amateur radio station, and when they're up there, they operate it. It's the most northern amateur radio station in the world, and but you're not going to hear them very often. So, amongst other things that we do, we have 2 major national contests. One of them is on Canada Day. Our national holiday is 3 days before yours, and the other one is the Radio Amateurs of Canada Winter Contest, which happens. Both of these are that one happens on a weekend, and depending on the timing, it ends up being either before or between Christmas and New Year's. I always like it better. Well, sometimes it's better between. People aren't as busy. They all have the same format. They're 24-hour contests beginning at the 00 Zulu. So they begin on a Saturday. Wait a minute. Friday, I think it's, no. I'm wrong. Is it Friday evening into Saturday? I guess it is. It's just went blank on that one. I mentioned all of these, back here, oops, I won't do it now. I showed you that we have all these different call sign regions. One of the other differences, I guess, we have is ARRL has W1AW, and when they're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the ARRL, could let people use it in different states at different times through that year as part of celebration. We have RAC call signs with the prefix for every call sign region in the country. And for these 2 national contests, we get our members to operate those stations in their region. And we do that for both of these. Anyone working one of the RAC call signs gets 20 points. And because this is our contest, we want lots of Canadians to get lots of work. So if you work a Canadian station, you get 10 points. If you work anyone else, it's 2. That's one of the characteristics of this event. I've even got the exchanges down there. It's a call sign, the signal report. For the Canadian stations, it's the letters of their province or territory, and all others have a serial number. We've recently been doing a number of special amateur radio events. We did a number of things for Canada's 150th anniversary in 2017. We have special prefixes that you can get at a certain time, and because Canada's been allocated many more prefixes than the ones we use for amateur radio. So we use CF, CG, CH, anyway, instead of the VEs, VE and VO. And in 2017, we had it arranged so that anyone in Canada who wanted to could use those special prefixes to mark the anniversary. We had a special project that I'll describe next, the Canada 150 Award, and we did a special Whisper project in that year, and I'll describe that briefly. We've done other special things around RAC's 25th anniversary in 2018, and there are a number, I think we're not unique in this, but a number of special events that we've done through the pandemic, and I'll describe those. So this is the description of, it's not quite the award certificate, but it's the description of the Canada 150 Award. The award certificate would be just like this, except instead of the bottom part, which explains the award, the award that you would get is listed. The award was based on how many of the RAC stations you worked. We were inspired to do this by 2 things. One of them was the W1AW being used all across the states for the ARRL's 100th anniversary. And the other one was a special event, sort of smaller, that was organized by a couple of our members, including one of our directors, to celebrate a very important battle in the First World War, the Battle of Vimy Ridge. It was important for Canadian development because it was the first time when a major operation was led by a Canadian commander and had all Canadian troops. Before that, Canadian troops tended to be attached to a number of other groups. And so it really helped pull the country together. So they got a call sign out of Nova Scotia, which is the VE1 prefix, and got a suffix 00 Vimy. So it came out as VE100 Vimy, and worked it across the country and gave people different awards for how many stations they worked, and called the awards after major parts of the battle. So it's the first time, maybe other people have done it, but it was the first contest that I heard of that was actually a history lesson. So we did the same kind of thing for this. We operated for 6 months from July 1st till the end of the year, our RAC stations in all of the different regions, and invited people to work as many as they could, and had a program so people could go on the internet, type in their call sign, and see how many stations they'd worked. And when they were finished, they pressed a button and it generated on their computer a completed certificate that they could just download. So this is Bill, Vice Director of the Hudson region, at one of the ARRL board meetings in one of our breaks, who had worked several stations, and I showed him that he could just type it into my computer, see his certificate. You just save that and print it, so you have it. So we like doing that, and I think let's go back to that. So we're quite happy with that. It's inspired some other things we've done later, and I really like the idea now, and of having downloadable awards. The other unique thing that we did was taking advantage in 2017. There were a lot of special events in Canada. One of them was to take a group of young Canadians on this decommissioned icebreaker through the Canadian Arctic. And there was to show them parts of Canada they'd never seen before. And some of our members, learning of this, talked to the organizers and asked if they could put a whisper beacon on it. And this ship then sailed from the eastern part, from Toronto, which is our biggest city, all the way up the Atlantic coast, through the Northwest Passage, and all the way back down to British Columbia. And we created this event and publicized it, asked people to send reports from the Whisper Beacon from all around the world. And people did analysis of the Whisper Beacon. It turns out, with very, very few people up here in the north, no one knows very much about what propagation is like and what affects it. After this was over, we reported it to our, we gave a presentation to the part of our government that deals with, I guess, with propagation and some issues. And you probably know that most aircraft these days use satellite communications, and a lot of the long distance flights go up over the Arctic. The backup is HF, and no one's sure exactly how that works. And so they were quite thrilled with the prospect of being able to know from these measurements what propagation was like. You know, there are auroral effects and things like that. We used this again actually in the pandemic, because were invited to participate in the IEEE Antennas and Propagation conference. So I think the ARRL usually has some sort of supports its local club that does such an event. About a third of the participants are hams. Actually, it's to show the rest of them amateur radio. It had to be done online because of the pandemic, and we did a presentation on this for it. The sort of, yeah, I still have a few minutes here. Just close to wrapping up here. In some of the recent events, we did an award, a participation event rather than a contest for World Amateur Radio Day. Until 2020, I'd sort of been aware of it. We hadn't really done very much about it. But with the pandemic happening and lots of people at home, we thought that we would use this as a way to get a lot of people on the air, and also get our volunteers operating the our RAC call signs out of their homes. And I'll show you the award for that afterwards. So again, we encourage people to get on the air, see how many RAC stations they could have developed contacts with, and used, as I'll show you in a minute, a similar process to create a certificate based on how many they've got. No, actually not based on how many they got. If we told them anyone who worked one of our stations will get a certificate, because it's a participation event. For the first time in our history, we did online amateur radio courses soon after the pandemic started. Most of the courses were run by clubs. Most of them were in person. One of the things about working in Canada, as an organization like ours, mostly with volunteers, we only get together in person every 2 years. Our board meets every 2 months, and it has forever. In what amount to teleconferences. We were using one of the video programs, and no one ever turned their camera on until the pandemic happened. And so when we had to move to online, it was actually pretty easy for us. We discovered using video. So we've been doing interactive online courses for basic and advanced. The CW course is a little different. We're in the third round of those courses, and we've had overwhelming numbers of participation. The clubs, some of our clubs have started doing online courses, but it took them a lot longer. We started doing these courses in April. The other thing that has been done, most of our exams are given by volunteers. Our regulator moved really quickly to allow remote examinations, and we've got a simpler system. You know, and I understand you have to have 3 people watching the person doing the exam. We only have 1, and it can be done as simply as being able to watch them while they answer the questions. You can't give you can't leave them with a copy of the questions. We don't want those circulating around, or our regulator doesn't. And but they moved very quickly to that, helped a lot. we had done our very first, the way we're incorporated, and it's different in different states in the US, I understand, but because we're incorporated, we have to have a meeting with our members every year. And we did that. Again, I guess it gave us some preparation for the pandemic, because we've been doing those as in-person meetings. And for about the last 8 years, we've been putting them out as webinars at the same time. But, you know, we had never thought about using online stuff as extensively until the pandemic happened. So we had to do a fully online meeting with members in September, and we preceded that with our first online national conference, which we streamed. You could register and see it like this on Zoom. You could see it live on streamed on our YouTube channel, and edited. We put it back up on the YouTube channel. I kicked it off with I guess we call it a fireside chat, like FDR had, with the president with Rick Roderick, president of the ARRL, Tim Ellen, the president of the IARU, and his name's just gone out of my head, the general manager of Radio Society of Great Britain. So we talked for about an hour in September about where we were in the pandemic, how it was affecting amateur radio. Each country learns a little bit more. In Britain, it turns out if you don't renew your license after 5 years, you lose it, but they never reissue it. So what happened in the pandemic was all sorts of people decided they wanted to get back into amateur radio, and the Radio Society of Great Britain had all the records, so they could find out how many people were getting back into amateur radio. The rest of us, I think, know anecdotally that more people are on nets. More people seem to be getting back into the hobby. We have all sorts of people taking our advanced course who were longtime hams, who had at the basic level and had sort of lost interest, but get back into it through that. So those were those two things. And we're going to do a World Amateur Radio Day event again this April. So what we had done for last year was we told people to get on the air, work one of the Radio Amateurs of Canada stations. We compiled all of the logs of the stations, and people could type in their call sign, and if they had a log, they could download the certificate. We're going to do, and last year that was the slogan that the IARU had, promoting global friendship among amateurs worldwide. This year they've got something much more pandemic related, so we're using it. Amateur radio home, but never alone. And so we are going to do the same thing with people operating the amateur radio stations. You only have to work one of them. Doesn't matter whether you work one of them or all of them to get the certificate, but it's your chance to work a bunch of them. And because it's not really a contest, we did things that we had never done before with it. We had one guy operating satellite stuff because he was in the Arctic and the HF wasn't reliable. And we had people operating in the same region with the same call sign, as long as they were on different frequencies and different modes. And our members were so happy to be able to use this sort of the RAC call sign that it really worked well. So, you know, I'm almost done. We have operating awards that are based on contacts with Canadian stations in all of the provinces and territories. They have to be in the same band. I don't think they have to be in the same mode. I checked that today. We have a 5-band award if you've worked all of them in 5 separate bands. And we also have an award for people who worked at least 10 of the 14 RAC stations, which given some of our events wouldn't be hard to get. I should say about our awards that they've been, we probably haven't paid as much attention as we should have until recently with how the awards are done. We had been talking with the ARRL for a while about trying to use Logbook, and there were issues with Logbook. We've now got something we think that will be worked out. For a long time, people had to send cards in. So we're revamping how we can do the awards. We're going to have we had old-fashioned certificates, and we're doing things to make them better. And I'll just end with saying, you know, we've got all the standard kinds of communications. The left one is a picture off the front of our website. It's really easy to find, rac.ca. And we have a magazine, the Canadian Amateur. Now, I guess the final thing, closest to marketing that I'm going to say, because of the long history with the ARRL, probably half of our members are ARRL members. You know, they're maybe not, but probably several thousand, 2,000 maybe more. But we also have a bunch of people in Canada who are ARRL members and not our members. So we have a small number of people who are mostly in the northern states who become our members. The magazine we have available online at a lower cost where it doesn't need to be printed. And that's usually the one that people opt for. So that's my presentation. I'd be happy to take questions on that or anything else.
Okay, everybody.
Any questions or comments?
Yes, I miss, good evening, Oscar, KP4 Radio Fox from Puerto Rico. Nice presentation, really defined the structure of the organization of the Canada. My question is, how many amateurs you have in Canada itself, and also how many members you have on your organization?
Well, we have our regulator says that there's 72,000. But we have probably only about 5,000 members. Now, the 72,000, because of the nature of our system, includes everyone who's authorized. So, you know, we know that there are people still driving around with license plates who are never on the air with their call signs on the license plate. But we have a smaller proportion of the number of amateurs, I think, than the ARRL would have, because the ARRL, I think, has 130, 140,000 or something out of the 770. I'm not sure.
That is typically correct. That will be my next. My next question is probably a statistic that you have to evaluate. How many active amateurs you have in Canada? Can you make an estimate? Because those are real numbers, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, those are numbers from you know, from our regulator, and I think it's really hard to tell what how many active members there are. You know, there are. We could probably ask the club how many members, and also you have to define what do you mean by an active member. You know, so we don't have a good estimate of the active members. We know the really active members who we see a lot. We know the people who make things happen. We know what's happening with clubs. Even in clubs, there are people whose amateur radio activity is to go to a club meeting and meet their friends sometimes. So that's hard to say. I would love to get that number. What I do know, I guess, but this is not statistical, it's analytical. It's more now than it would have been before the pandemic, which is kind of heartening, you know.
It is a symptom of going to the air, being a little bit more active.
Yeah,
and that is good.
Yeah.
I know that is an estimate, but those are, you know, you just said it. You want to know as well. How many are active? How many delivers their activities? How many go to the field days or are on the air? And also making a statistic who wants to meet and who are disappearing. I mean, who are just having a license.
Well, and you know, there's another thing about being active too, and this is just a personal thing with me. In our regulations we refer amateur radio operators, and I tend to call them radio amateurs because I know, you know, some really get dedicated people who are writing articles and giving courses and maybe not on the air very much, but they're radio amateurs as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, that defines active as well.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Glenn. Beautiful presentation.
Yes, very much so. Are there any more questions out there?
Yes,
Derek,
this is Anthony K. ZT.
go ahead, Lee.
Glenn, the Canada 150 award, I thought that was really well done. A great certificate, and the way it functioned automatically online was really nice. Any idea on when the Canada awards will be more automated in the future? Because I'm interested in the Canada 5 band.
Yeah. We've already, we have a committee that's already approved how we will do it. We haven't made it public yet. It's still not on our website. We're going to use, again, a fairly simple process because at what we were talking to the IAWR about, and because they were thinking of doing something with Japan and the Japanese contests and that was going to be a lot more complicated, probably more secure. But I think what we're planning on going to is having people print out their logbook of the world contest sheets and verify that, maybe get an we do with some people in remote areas, have hams who are unrelated verify that this is a fair presentation. It hasn't, and use that as a way of because people, I'm forever getting calls from people saying, why can't we use Logbook to do this, or Club Log, or any one of the other ones. So that is the thing that people are working on now, to sort of get the wrinkles out, make sure they're happy with it, and then we'll be announcing it.
Then just another question also along those lines. A lot of the U.S. states have state CUSO parties, and I know there's the Canadian provinces that have them, the VE7 and the VE3 contest.
Yeah.
Any talk of adding some of the other provinces to that sort of format? That'd be very interesting.
Yeah, it gets talked about sometimes. One of in fact, our Quebec, the people in Quebec were thinking of doing it at one point. The challenge is finding a weekend, right? Because there's so many. So that's one of the challenges. You're right. The Ontario one and the BC one are big ones. That actually is probably something. There are contest clubs in various places. Then they're the ones more who organize them, rather than us. The same way. It's probably the same way.
Yes.
Right, rather than us. So we know there's a lot of that there's a lot of interest in that. But I had another thought, something I just sort of went out of my mind about. Yeah, no, I'm not sure now. But I don't know of any that are in planning places. It's probably less likely in places with fewer hams, like maybe even Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but there is a contest club in the Maritimes. They might even do a regional one, but I don't know if they've done in that one. There are 4 smaller provinces, but they work together.
Well, that'd be nice if they did something along the lines of the New England CUSO party, because they do the same sort of thing with their smaller states.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so we watch and learn from one another.
Which is a good thing.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is. It is.
Let's call upon Mike here, N6JGA. He's got his hand up.
Yeah, Glenn, thanks for doing this. It's great, but I wasn't sure I understood your call sign program and how it's laid out. Could you review that again? The VA, VE.
Oh, okay.
VY, and you have a couple of CY
Yeah,
codes.
yeah.
out there.
Okay, I can even, if I could probably go to that slide and.
You're going to have to redo your desktop. I downed it.
Yeah, I know. I just would have to. I could just bring it back to this one. Okay, so that means I have to go and find a little green button first. Yeah.
Well, it is Sam Tate used to,
So here, I'll just share my screen and then move this up so that. Is that in the,
You're there.
I'm
Yeah,
there?
That's it. That's
Okay.
it.
Yeah, actually, you're probably seeing more than just it, but there's enough. That's enough. Maybe make it a little. So yes, the the large provinces with a lot of hams usually have the VE and VA in it, and the numbers. So this is Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. This is the Yukon Territory, VY1. For a while, there was a remote station in the Yukon. It was being operated by some people from the south, but I think it was in an older hams place. I don't think it's operating as much now. There are not very many in VE8 in the Northwest Territories. Mostly, there's an amateur radio club right here. You know, the very few in this VY0. This is called Nunavut, and it's this big area around here. These two over here, CY9, St. Paul Island, and CY0, are call signs. It's sort of a funny thing. They're call signs that can be used in those locations, but they're uninhabited islands. So if you have a de-expedition to go to one of them, you can apply for a call sign to use while you're there. So that's where the two CY stations are. The VO1 is Newfoundland, and VO2 is the province is Newfoundland and Labrador. The Newfoundland island is here, and Labrador is this part. There are not very many people in Labrador, although there's one of the guys who lives where I do, whose parents are in Labrador, and he has a remote station which he operates from home, and it's in his parents' backyard. And a couple of guys go here for the 160 meter contests. This one here you're not going to hear on the air. This other VY, that VY9, some of our regional offices of our regulator have amateur radio stations in them. And so the VY9 is for Canadian government amateur radio, which is a kind of a, I guess they might use it for listening or something. The other one I didn't mention is, and I don't know if the US has one of these, we have a call sign for Canadian flagged ships that are operating in international waters. Is there a US equivalent? So if it's a ship that has an amateur radio station on it, and the ship is registered in Canada, but it's not in Canadian waters, it can use VE0. It might be like an aeronautical call sign too, but that's what that's used for. It's international, yeah, VE0 in international waters.
I guess one of the things that surprised me was that you say you have some 70,000 hams in the country, and yet most of your regions have 2 prefixes for them. I was wondering how you use them.
Well, what happens is we have one thing I didn't really mention for you. Most prefixes are three-letter prefixes, so the contesters hate it, right? There are 2-letter prefixes available, and you have to be a ham for 5 years to apply for one. But so with a 2-letter prefix, you would have 26 times 26 possibilities. So in the place where I live in Ontario, every one of those is allocated. People will sit by their phone, by their computer at midnight, because a year after someone has died, they'll release the call sign and they try to snap it up. That's the problem in the biggest province here, and to some extent in Quebec and in British Columbia. The 3-letter call signs, that's 26 by 26 by 26. There are lots of those, so they're unallocated call signs. But I guess there maybe the second prefix was as much to make sure that you try to have enough of the 2-letter call signs. But even with the 2 prefixes, it's not enough in Ontario right now.
Okay, thank you.
There's a small number of, as you might imagine, it might be the same in the States. There's a small number of three-letter combinations which aren't used because they might be something naughty or or profane or whatever. Anything else?
Anybody else out there?
Someone wants to know if you have a contact email.
Okay, the really easy contact email, president@rac.ca.
Okay. And also, do you have an effective youth program?
Do we have a youth program?
Yes.
Yeah, I mentioned that in one slide. We do a number of things with youth. Like there are things outside of our organization that our members are doing, like with cadets and with scouts and guides and on the air and those kinds of things. Our youth programs are mostly support for youth initiatives or initiatives around youth, like amateur radio stations that they're setting up. We also have, so we've been working, one of our directors who's in our program is called CFARS. What's the U.S. program for hams where they're operating with the military close to the ham bands? Mars, yeah. So he's also involved in Mars, and he's been working with some of our cadet groups, and we've actually had a number of cadet groups that have decided that they want to have amateur radio licenses. So we have a bunch of cadets coming into our online courses right now. So we're doing those kinds of things with youth as well. We have a coordinator. He's a middle school teacher who operates a rocket club, and he's one thing I realized, I didn't mention anything about amateur radio on the International Space Station. We're very much involved with that. I'm one of the two Canadian delegates to ARIS International, and so we do give a lot of support to ARIS school contacts, and he also is the person who runs our youth education program.
Someone wants to know if you were around during the March 13th, 1989 blackout in Quebec due to the solar storm, and was amateur radio used for EMCOM during that?
I don't know about the. It might have been. I don't know. It's funny. I don't know about that. What I do know, the major event for our part of the world, and that was Ontario and Quebec, was the Great Ice Storm. That was 1998, I guess. And amateur radio was used because there were some people without power for quite a long time. Like I think of one of the places in Quebec where in fact, they were set up with the hospital, but it turned out that the people who were doing communications for their ambulance service didn't have any power, and there was an amateur radio station in the hospital, and hams with mobile radios hopped into each ambulance, and for about a week provided the communications that way. So there were all sorts of. It was a 1 in 400 year storm, a major ice storm that ended up bringing down, in some places in rural areas, miles of power lines, because there was so much ice that all of the poles broke, and it took weeks to get things fixed. So even in this local area where the sort of more traditional, or one of the things that you do in communications where you're helping with logistics, when they had people who had to move out of their homes because there was no power, and they moved into places where there was no phone service, you need to have a ham there with a radio to let people know when you're running short on toilet paper, right? It's not the most glorious stuff, but it's really important to, and so there were no ends of those kinds of stories from the 1998 event.
Okay. No other questions, Dan?
Okay.
Anyway.
There's nothing here to hands up. Anything else?
Okay, thanks. Well, I enjoyed being here. I'll be back to watch some of your other things. That's great.
You're invited back anytime. Thank everybody for coming.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks for giving me this audience. It's great.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. This is super great. All right. Now I gotta.
Well, I just realized here. Are you guys seeing my call sign the right way?
Yes, I think.
Oh, because on my computer I see the mirror image. It's. I guess that's just the way these things work. Okay.
Unless there's some other comments, we'll close her out for now. Thanks again, very, very much so, Dennis. Oh, Dennis, go ahead.
What? Thanks, Glenn. That was great.
Okay. Thank you.
Fantastic. 7-3.
7-3.
7-3, everybody. Thank you all for coming again.